All right, welcome back for another deep dive.
Always fun to be back.
Today, we're looking into a fascinating legal case,
Oh yeah, big one.
Bundy v. State.
The 1984 Florida Supreme Court decision.
Right, and you sent over some excerpts from the court document itself.
I did.
And, wow, this case is intense.
It's pretty wild.
We're talking brutal attacks, controversial bite mark evidence.
And hypnotism even.
Yeah.
It's got it all.
So this case kind of captures, like, a pivotal moment in forensic science.
Yeah. Yeah, that
I mean, some of the techniques used back then, I don't know.
did raise some eyebrows today, for sure.
Yeah. To set the stage, this all starts January 15th, 1978,
Chi Omega Sorority House.
near Florida State University.
Right.
So picture this, right? A night turns into a total nightmare.
Yeah.
4 young women are attacked in their sleep, brutally beaten.
Awful.
2 of them, Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy,
Yeah.
didn't make it.
Tragically.
And if that wasn't horrifying enough,
Right.
just a short time later,
Another woman, Cheryl Thomas, attacked in her apartment.
nearby apartment,
So the whole community.
on edge,
Yeah.
fear, pressure to find this attacker.
It's like something out of a true crime documentary.
Totally.
So now, enter Nita Neary,
Okay, yeah.
a Chi Omega resident,
Uh-huh.
became a key witness.
Mm-hmm.
She had this brief encounter with the attacker.
Leaving the sorority house.
So her account was crucial. She described him to police.
Gave them details.
Like his clothes, his build.
noticeable nose.
Right. Led to that, like, famous police sketch.
That was everywhere.
Yeah.
All over the news.
So we've got these terrifying attacks,
Yeah.
frantic investigation,
Yeah.
and then the pieces start falling into place.
Pointing towards Ted Bundy.
Right. But the evidence against him was a mixed bag.
Yeah. A real mixed bag.
Right.
Yes.
Some of it was, like, what they call circumstantial.
Right. Like, Bundy was seen near the sorority house.
Hours before.
And his reaction.
When he heard about the attacks was, let's just say, odd.
Odd. He also took off running?
A couple of times when cops tried to question him.
Yeah. So that's suspicious for sure.
Yeah, suspicious. But they needed more.
Needed something more concrete to really make their case.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is where 2 pieces of physical evidence come in.
This is key.
First, they find hairs
In Cheryl Thomas's apartment.
that match Bundy's.
That puts him at the scene of the second attack.
Okay, so that's pretty damning.
Yeah.
The second piece of evidence is the real head scratcher.
This one's a doozy.
Bite mark analysis.
They had an expert testify. That bite marks on Lisa Levy's body.
Matched Bundy's teeth.
They even showed the jury photographs of the bite marks next to molds of his teeth.
Wait, they were matching bite marks to teeth? Like, back then?
They were?
Was that, like, even considered reliable science at the time?
Well, that's where things get murky.
Yeah.
Think of it like a much more complicated version of fingerprint analysis.
They were looking for, like, unique patterns and characteristics in the bite marks that supposedly lined up with Bundy's teeth.
Yeah.
But even back then, there were questions about how accurate and objective this method really was.
I can see why that would be controversial.
Yeah. Especially in a case with such high stakes.
Right. And then, to add another layer of complexity.
We've got Nita Neary's testimony.
Right.
Remember, she's the one who saw the attacker.
Leaving the sorority house, the one with the police sketch.
Uh-huh.
So a week after the attacks, she underwent hypnosis.
To try to sharpen her memories.
And this obviously raises a whole bunch of legal questions.
Well, yeah.
Like, did the hypnosis actually, like, improve her memory, or did it potentially plant false memories? I mean, we've all seen those movies where hypnosis goes wrong.
Right.
Right.
And at the pre-trial hearing, you had experts arguing both sides.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Some said it was a valuable tool, while others argued it was too unreliable.
It could taint the testimony. So what did the court decide to do?
It's a tough one, right?
Yeah, I imagine they had to walk a fine line.
They did.
What'd they do?
They allowed Neary's testimony.
Okay.
But it wasn't a simple decision.
Yeah.
They reasoned that the hypnosis happened before Bundy was even a suspect, so it's less likely that her memories were, like, intentionally influenced. Plus, they said her statements under hypnosis didn't really contradict her initial descriptions.
So they were basically saying it was worth hearing what she had to say,
Right.
but the jury needed to take the hypnosis into consideration.
Exactly.
It's fascinating to see how these complex issues were playing out in such a high-profile case.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we haven't even gotten to Bundy's attempts to, like, control the media frenzy surrounding the case.
Oh, yeah.
This was way before the internet.
Right.
But the public was completely captivated
Oh, totally.
by this story. So how did Bundy try to manage that?
Well, he wanted to close the pretrial hearings to the public. He argued all the media attention was making it impossible for him to get a fair trial. He was basically saying that everyone already assumed he was guilty.
Yeah.
Because of the media.
I mean, it makes sense that he'd be worried about that.
Yeah.
Did the court agree?
Not completely.
Okay.
They didn't shut down the hearings, but they did agree to move the trial.
Okay.
To a different location.
To, like...
And to carefully screen potential jurors.
Yeah, to, like, make sure it was fair.
They were trying to strike a balance between transparency and making sure Bundy got a fair shake.
Right. So it sounds like this case was already a legal battleground.
Oh, yeah.
Before the trial even officially began.
It was. We've only just scratched the surface. Wait till we get into the trial itself, where that bite mark evidence really takes center stage.
Oh, wow.
It's a wild ride, trust me.
So we left off with Bundy trying to control that media frenzy around the case.
Right, all that pre-trial drama.
And eventually the trial had to start. Did all that, like, actually affect how things played out in the courtroom?
It's tough to say for sure, but it definitely set the stage, you know.
For a high-stakes legal battle.
Oh, absolutely.
And like we talked about, that bite mark evidence became, like, the main event of the trial.
It really did, yeah.
It's like the whole case hinged on those bite marks.
In a lot of ways.
So walk me through how this all played out.
Okay, so the prosecution brought in their expert, right?
Yeah.
A forensic odontologist.
Bridget?
Basically, a dentist who specializes in bite mark analysis.
Okay.
So he comes in, presents his findings to the jury.
Comparing the bite marks on Lisa Levy's body to those dental molds of Bundy's teeth.
Exactly.
Can you imagine being on that jury?
Oh, I can't even imagine.
Looking at those photos?
They'd be chilling.
So did they just, like, hold the photos and the molds side by side?
No. It was definitely more involved than that.
Okay.
The expert went into great detail about his methodology, pointing out specific features of Bundy's teeth that he claimed matched the indentations on the victim. Even used, like, enlarged photos to really highlight those details for the jury.
Wow.
It's like, you know, solving a puzzle.
Right.
But instead of pieces, it was teeth marks.
That's intense. But Bundy's lawyers weren't just going to sit back and let this expert sway the jury.
Of course not. They fought back hard.
What'd they do?
They argued that bite mark analysis was way too subjective.
Okay.
And lacked the scientific rigor of, say, fingerprinting.
Okay.
They even brought in their own expert.
Oh, wow.
Who basically said the whole thing was unreliable and open to bias.
So you had these two experts going head-to-head.
Classic courtroom showdown.
Each trying to convince the jury that their interpretation was the right one.
Yeah, and the jury stuck right in the middle.
Tough spot to be in.
Ultimately, the judge decided to allow the bite mark evidence.
And the prosecution's expert testimony.
Yeah.
That's a big decision. It makes you wonder if things would have gone differently if the judge had ruled the other way.
Oh, absolutely. And it's important to remember that this decision didn't settle the debate about bite mark analysis.
Right.
In fact, it's become even more controversial in recent years.
Really?
Yeah, with many experts now saying it's not nearly as reliable as it was once thought to be.
Huh. Okay, so the jury heard about the bite marks. What about Nita Neary's testimony?
Right. The one who underwent hypnosis.
Yeah, to enhance her memory of the attacker.
That was another huge point of contention.
Yeah.
Bundy's lawyers were adamant
that her testimony shouldn't be allowed.
They argued that the hypnosis could have distorted her memories.
And this was back in 1984, right?
Yeah.
Wasn't that a time when people were really into hypnosis and, like, its potential for uncovering hidden memories?
Yeah, it was definitely having a moment.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the legal system was grappling with, you know, the potential downsides.
Right.
Concerns about suggestibility.
Right.
Meaning that the hypnotist might unintentionally lead the witness to remember things that didn't actually happen.
So how did the court handle this tricky situation?
Well, they had to weigh the potential benefits
of getting more information from Neary.
Against the risk that her memories might be tainted. It wasn't an easy call.
Yeah.
And there wasn't, like, any clear-cut legal precedent in Florida at the time.
They were in uncharted territory.
Pretty much.
So what did they decide?
They ended up allowing Neary's testimony.
Okay.
But with a big caveat.
Okay.
They acknowledged the concerns about hypnosis and instructed the jury to be extra cautious.
When considering her statements.
They basically said, you can listen to her, but keep in mind that she was hypnotized.
It's like they were trying to have it both ways.
Yeah.
Get the potentially valuable testimony
Right.
while still acknowledging the potential for problems.
Exactly. And it's another example of how this case really pushed the boundaries of forensic science and legal procedure. It raised questions that the courts are still grappling with today.
It's like a legal and scientific time capsule.
I like that.
So we've got the bite marks, we've got the hypnosis. What else was at play in this trial?
Well, there were a lot of other legal arguments flying back and forth, but those were the two big ones. And remember, all of this was playing out against the backdrop of intense media scrutiny.
And public fascination.
Oh, yeah. This case was huge.
It must have been incredibly stressful for everyone involved.
No doubt.
But eventually, after all that back and forth, the jury had to reach a decision.
Yeah, they did.
And it was a big one.
After weeks of testimony, deliberations, they found Ted Bundy guilty.
Guilty on all counts.
Guilty on all counts.
Yeah.
2 counts of first-degree murder, 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder, and 2 counts of burglary.
It was a clean sweep for the prosecution.
It was.
That must have sent shockwaves through the courtroom.
Oh, yeah.
So even with the guilty verdict, the trial wasn't over. This was a capital case.
Which means there was still the sentencing phase to come.
Right.
The big question. Would Bundy get life in prison or the death penalty?
And that decision, as you can imagine, was far from straightforward.
It was a very complex decision.
Involving weighing all those, aggravating and mitigating factors we talked about earlier.
Right, right. And the Florida Supreme Court, in their decision, had to carefully consider every angle, every argument.
Every piece of evidence.
It's a fascinating look into how the justice system operates in these incredibly complex and high-stakes cases.
So we're back. And things just got real, right?
Yeah.
We followed this Bundy case through the investigation. The trial.
The jury's decision.
Yeah, now it all comes down to sentencing. This is where it gets heavy.
This is it, yeah. A guilty verdict in a capital case.
Especially one as high profile as Bundy's.
Triggers a whole other proceeding.
It's not just about whether he did it anymore.
It's about what price society demands.
Life imprisonment or the death penalty.
Yeah, those are the options.
It's hard to even imagine being in that courtroom, feeling that tension.
I can't imagine.
What kind of arguments were presented at this point? I mean, how do you even begin to argue for or against something like that?
So the prosecution, pushing for the death penalty, they focused on what are called aggravating circumstances.
Okay.
Things that make the crime even more serious. So they pointed to the sheer brutality of the attacks.
Right.
The fact that the victims were young women asleep in their own home.
Totally vulnerable.
They brought up Bundy's prior conviction in Utah.
For aggravated kidnapping.
Right. So painting a picture of a dangerous pattern of behavior.
It sounds like they were pulling out all the stops to convince the jury that Bundy was a threat.
Yeah.
And that the ultimate punishment was warranted.
Right. On the other side, Bundy's defense team, they tried to highlight mitigating circumstances.
Okay.
Factors that might make the jury lean towards a life sentence instead.
Okay.
They presented testimony aimed at showing that despite the horrific nature of the crimes, Bundy wasn't beyond redemption.
That he had the potential for rehabilitation. For, living a productive life, even behind bars. It's almost like 2 completely different stories being told.
It is.
One focusing on the horror of what happened, the other on the possibility of change.
That's the heart of the death penalty debate, isn't it?
Yeah.
It forces us to confront these incredibly difficult questions about justice, punishment, the potential for human beings to change.
Yeah. Even after committing terrible acts. But in this specific case,
the Florida Supreme Court upheld the death penalty.
For Ted Bundy. So what were the deciding factors? What made them come to that conclusion?
Their decision was very detailed, meticulous. They listed several aggravating factors that they found particularly significant. First, Bundy was already serving time for that kidnapping conviction in Utah. Second, they pointed to that prior conviction as evidence of a pattern of violence. Third, they emphasized that the murders happened during burglaries.
Which added another layer of seriousness to the crime.
Exactly. And finally, they stated that the crimes were especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel.
given the way the victims were attacked and killed, so in their view, the severity of the crimes, combined with Bundy's past, basically tipped the scales towards the death penalty, even considering the arguments for his potential rehabilitation.
That's right. But Bundy's lawyers appealed the sentence. They challenged the court's reasoning on several fronts.
Like what?
Well, they argued that using his Utah sentence and the prior conviction as separate aggravating factors was like double counting.
Okay.
They also contested the heinous, atrocious, and cruel label, saying it wasn't justified.
Based on the evidence.
Exactly.
So it sounds like they were trying every legal avenue to try and get the sentence reduced. Did any of it work?
None of it succeeded.
Right.
The Florida Supreme Court went through each argument point by point, citing legal precedent and really dissecting the details of the case.
Yeah.
Their conclusion was firm. The death sentence was justified under Florida law.
This case really illustrates the weight of these legal decisions, especially when life and death are on the line. But beyond the verdict and the sentence, what are the bigger takeaways from Bundy v. State? What makes it relevant all these years later?
Well, for one, it's a stark reminder of how much forensic science has evolved. Think about that bite mark analysis. It was considered acceptable evidence back then.
Right.
But it's highly controversial today. Many experts now question its reliability, and it's rarely used in court. Imagine if this case happened today. DNA evidence would likely be the game changer, not bite marks.
It makes you wonder if the outcome would even be different.
Totally.
If Bundy was tried today, with all the advancements in forensic technology, changes in legal standards.
Right. And it's not just bite marks. The case also raises questions about the use of hypnotically aided testimony.
Yeah.
While it's not completely inadmissible in court today, it's much more restricted. There are stricter safeguards in place to ensure its reliability. Back then, it was kind of the Wild West of forensic techniques.
So for our listener, why should they care about a case that happened almost 50 years ago?
Because it's not just about Ted Bundy. This case offers a glimpse into the evolution of our justice system. It raises these big questions about balancing the need to catch criminals with protecting individual rights, the role of science in the courtroom, and ultimately what justice really means. It's a story about a specific case, but it also touches on these timeless issues that we're still grappling with today.
And remember, this deep dive is just the starting point. If you're intrigued by this, we encourage you to explore further. We'll include links to the actual court documents, articles on bite mark analysis, resources about the history of hypnotically aided testimony. Do your own research. Draw your own conclusions.
That's what makes a deep dive so rewarding.
So we'll leave you with this. How do you think Bundy v. State would be decided today? Knowing what we know now about forensic science and the law, it's something to ponder. Until next time, keep diving deep.